Welcome to Com Drama Stories. Today's full-length story explores the incredible strength, quiet justice, and absolute resilience of a woman facing the fight of her life. Before we begin, here is a quick overview of what unfolds in this story. When 42-year-old Bunny Foster receives a terminal diagnosis, she prepares to share the tragic news with her husband, Gerald. However, a chance eavesdropping reveals a heartbreaking betrayal. Gerald is secretly plotting to hand over her family's beloved apple orchard to a developer while waiting for her to pass away. Refusing to let her life's work be dismantled, Bunny executes a silent, brilliant plan over her final 6 months. She changes her estate papers, protects her children's future, and delivers an unforgettable lesson in quiet strength during the annual Harvest Festival. My name is Bunny Foster, and I am 42 years old. On the first Tuesday of March, in a cold, sterile doctor's office in Traverse City, I was given 6 to 9 months to live. 40 minutes later, sitting in my truck in a freezing parking lot, I rehearsed the words I would say to my husband. I practiced the delivery until my voice stopped trembling. Gerald, I have bad news. It's cancer, and we don't have much time. I never got to say those words. That evening, as I walked up to the doorway of my cider house, I heard Gerald laughing into his phone. It was a warm, intimate laugh I hadn't heard him use with me in years. Standing in the shadows between the cider press and the outer wall, the cold air smelled of old wood and sweet cider. Then his voice came through crystal clear. Relax. She won't be around forever. A soft, knowing laugh followed. I stood frozen in the dark with my terminal diagnosis folded in my coat pocket, listening to my husband assure someone else that my time was running out. When my boot clicked against the gravel, Gerald turned. In a split second, his expression changed with terrifying smoothness. Hey honey, he said easily, sliding his phone into his jacket. That was the parts guy. The tractor clutch is backordered again. I knew the equipment dealership closed at 5 o'clock. It was nearly 7. But I nodded, met his eyes, and said pot roast was for dinner. Something inside me went completely cold and still. The way an orchard settles right before a hard freeze, drawing all its sap deep into the roots where frost cannot touch it. I walked into that cider house a wife with bad news. I walked out a woman with a deadline. To understand what I was protecting, you have to see Foster Orchard in October. Sitting on 140 acres outside Harlow's Mill, south of Traverse City, the whole hillside smells of ripe fruit, crushed leaves, and wood smoke during picking season. My late husband, Tom, planted half those apple trees with his own hands. We were married for 14 years and raised our 2 children in the old farmhouse. Our daughter, Marin, inherited my sharp eyes and stubborn streak. Our son, Caleb, could fix any engine built before he was born. Tom died 8 years ago. A sudden heart attack right between the rows of Honeycrisp on a crisp September morning. He was there for breakfast and gone before lunch. I was 34 years old. Everyone in town expected me to sell the property. Instead, I learned spray schedules, took over the accounting ledgers, and steered the farm through 2 severe spring freezes that wiped out half the crops in the county. Every October, we hosted the annual Harvest Festival, continuing the tradition Tom's parents had started decades earlier. We ran hay wagons, kept the cider press humming all day, and welcomed the whole community. Now Marin was 21, studying agricultural business in Traverse City, and returning home every weekend to help. Caleb was 17, a high school senior with hands made for machinery. Those 2 kids were my entire life. For a year after Tom died, I managed the farm alone. Then, at a co-op equipment auction on a rainy afternoon, a well-dressed man named Gerald Mercer bid against me for a chemical sprayer, lost on purpose, and made me laugh in the parking lot. Gerald was 42, a widowed sales manager at the local dealership. He was charming, attentive, and patient. After 2 years of quiet courtship, I accepted his proposal. My longtime lawyer, Harriet Cho, insisted on drafting a prenuptial agreement before the wedding. The orchard and the family trust Tom and I built would remain entirely mine, dedicated to the children. If Gerald and I ever divorced, he would receive a flat settlement of $60,000, his personal belongings, and no claim to the land. Gerald signed it without hesitation. I'm not here for the land, Bunny, he told me smoothly. I'm here for you. For 5 years, our marriage was good. Gerald learned every neighbor's name, shook hands at the harvest festival, and slowly became the public face of Foster Orchards while I handled the heavy labor and the financial books. But over time, subtle changes occurred. A joint card was added to the farm account for convenience. His signature was added at the co-op for convenience. A power of attorney was signed 3 years and after a neighbor's stroke spooked us both. Again, for convenience. Convenience is a door you leave unlocked for someone you trust, never imagining who else might walk through it. The physical trouble had begun in mid-February during pruning season, a persistent dull ache in my back that wrapped around my waist like a tightened belt. Soon after, my appetite vanished, and I dropped 10 pounds without trying. One morning, I noticed my eyes looked faintly yellowed in the bathroom mirror. True to my nature, I handled it quietly. I scheduled tests and follow-up ultrasounds between cider deliveries so no one would worry. When the oncologist, Dr. Okafor, gave me the news, he didn't sugarcoat it. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer that had already spread to my liver. Surgery was impossible. Chemotherapy could buy time, months rather than years, but it was not a cure. I took out my farm notebook and wrote down the details in clean, precise handwriting. I asked 3 simple questions. What the treatments would feel like, whether my mind would stay sharp until the end, and how long I could safely drive. Dr. Okafor answered each one directly. Sitting in my truck after that appointment, I realized I had planned the orchard's management 10 years into the future, but someone else would see those trees mature. My first impulse had been to tell Gerald everything, but after hearing him on the phone at the cider house, my instincts kicked in. 3 days later, Gerald left for a weekend sales trip downstate. In his haste, he left his primary toolbox near the barn door. Underneath the bottom tray lay a second phone I had never seen before. It unlocked with his birthday. The text messages stretched back 7 months to a contact listed as D. There were hotel confirmations in Traverse City on dates his calendar claimed he was at trade shows, along with disparaging comments about my management style and financial caution. More importantly, the messages detailed a business deal. Once the lease is signed, we're set. Tell your board it's as good as done. She'll come around. I handle her paperwork. D was Dana Whitfield of Whitfield Packing and Cold Storage. Her company had spent a year trying to lease our cider house and 30 prime acres for 20 years. A proposal Gerald had repeatedly urged me to accept. The affair and the business proposal were part of the same strategy. The betrayal was his financial plan. Using my own phone, I photographed every message on the screen, wiped the device clean, and placed it back exactly as I found it. That night, sitting alone in the cold cider house, I did the math. My children would survive the emotional loss. They had buried their father and knew how to grieve. But the farm trust held all our land, and I was its sole trustee. 2 years earlier, out of love and trust, I had signed powers of attorney naming Gerald as both my financial and medical representative. If the illness compromised my mind, Gerald, the man promising someone else I wouldn't be around forever, would hold complete control over my affairs. He could access accounts, make medical decisions, and sign contracts on my behalf while I was incapacitated. Before sunrise, I made 2 unshakable decisions. 1. Gerald Mercer would never learn I was terminally ill. He would not play the grieving husband while dismantling my estate. 2. Every document, signature, and legal safeguard would be finalized before the annual Harvest Festival in October. At 7 sharp on Monday morning, I called Harriet Cho. Harriet's office felt like a fortress. When we laid out the paperwork, the existing estate structure was mostly solid. The prenuptial agreement kept the land separate in a divorce. However, Harriet pointed out 2 critical vulnerabilities. If I passed away while still legally married to Gerald, the prenuptial terms allowed him to reside in the farmhouse for a full year and collect a $150,000 life insurance policy I had maintained out of courtesy. Furthermore, the powers of attorney granted him total authority the moment I became unable to speak for myself. These need to be revoked immediately, Harriet said firmly. We need new trust arrangements, updated medical directives, and a divorce filing. But doing this quietly takes time, Bunny. Do you have time? Let's say I have a hard deadline, I replied quietly. The October harvest. Harriet didn't press for details. We began drafting the revocations that very afternoon. On Thursday, medical staff placed a port beneath my collarbone, and the following Tuesday, I began my first chemotherapy infusion. The treatment regimen was intense, requiring a continuous pump fed through a small bag I wore beneath my flannel shirt for 2 days after each session. To keep my family from noticing, I created a cover story. I claimed I had joined a regional quilting guild that met on Tuesdays, often staying overnight at Marin's apartment in Traverse City following early morning trips to the farmer's market. Paradoxically, Gerald's frequent business trips provided the perfect cover. On the days I was most ill from side effects, he was away downstate. By late April, I signed the document revoking Gerald's power of attorney and named my daughter, Marin, as my official medical and financial representative. Bringing Marin into the legal process required careful positioning. I framed it as standard estate planning that every agricultural family undergoes. Marin signed at the kitchen table, though her sharp eyes lingered on me with subtle concern. Next, I visited the local bank branch to remove the secondary card on the farm's operating account. While there, the branch manager, Mr. Peterson, discreetly informed me that Gerald had recently inquired about securing a home equity line of credit against the orchard property. Peterson had turned him away, clarifying that only the primary trustee could initiate such a request. Armed with this knowledge, I accelerated my timeline. On Caleb's 18th birthday, we hosted a gathering at the farmhouse with family and friends. Gerald was in top form, warm, entertaining, and charming everyone in the room. Watching him interact with the guests felt like viewing a well-directed film. Later that evening, after the guests had departed, Gerald sat quietly over a glass of whiskey and spoke candidly about his father, who had spent 9 years deteriorating from severe dementia. He spoke of his mother's burnout from acting as a full-time caregiver. "She went into that room a wife and came out a shell of herself," Gerald said softly. "No one should ever be trapped in a sick room like that." Hearing his perspective provided clarity. Gerald was not merely self-interested. He was deeply averse to illness and caretaking. It explained his behavior, even if it did not justify his choices. Sitting nearby, I realized that had I disclosed my diagnosis in March, he would have distanced himself almost immediately while attempting to secure his financial position. By May, I discovered a folder Gerald had left in his truck. Inside was a draft of the Whitfield lease with my printed name on the signature line, alongside an email exchange from Dana Whitfield asking, "If she keeps stalling, is there another way? You said you handle her paperwork." The power of attorney I had just revoked was his primary plan. Gerald's intended compensation was a paid farm manager position once the lease took effect, along with a significant referral fee. The following week, after a medical checkup, I stood alone in the cider house. On the central wooden beam above the press, where Tom's father had traditionally carved annual harvest tallies, I took a pencil and carefully wrote in clean block letters, "Last best harvest, 2nd Saturday of October." At dinner that Sunday, I announced that this year's Harvest Festival would be our largest event yet, featuring live music, doubled press operations, and invitations sent across the entire county. To my family, it was a major community event. To me, it was my operational deadline. Every legal document, account transfer, and property title had to be secured before that day arrived. In June, my scans showed a temporary partial response to treatment. The tumor growth had slowed, granting me a brief window of stability. However, nerve damage in my hands began making precise movements difficult. Recognizing that every document required a legible signature, I asked Harriet to expedite the remaining trust restatements. The updated agreement named Marin as co-trustee immediately, giving her equal legal authority over all accounts and farm operations. Harriet's legal firm was designated as trust protector to ensure my 21-year-old daughter would have experienced backing if challenged. Caleb and Marin were named equal heirs to the orchard, and the $150,000 life insurance policy was redirected into a structured education and equipment trust for both children. The signing took an hour in Harriet's conference room, complete with witnesses, a notary, a formal medical certification of legal capacity from Dr. Okafor, and a video recording of the proceeding to prevent future legal challenges. With the trust restatement finalized, Harriet presented the next document. Foster versus Mercer, the formal divorce petition. I took the petition home and considered it for 3 days. Filing meant entering a public legal process, managing discovery, and addressing the issue directly. But Gerald continued to press for the Whitfield lease at home, becoming visibly frustrated whenever I declined. Furthermore, Caleb casually mentioned that Gerald had placed a holding deposit on a townhome in Traverse City, anticipating funds he had not yet acquired. That Sunday evening, while Gerald was away at a dinner in Grand Rapids, I sat down with Maren and Caleb at the kitchen table. Without a dramatic speech, I laid out the printed photographs of the text messages, hotel reservations, and email exchanges regarding the farm lease. Maren was instantly furious, advocating for immediate public exposure. Caleb remained quiet, processing the revelation about a man who had attended his sports games and taught him to fish. I gently set the boundary for how we would handle the situation. We would not engage in public drama or shouting matches. We would rely strictly on legal documentation, clear evidence, and formal proceedings. Maren signed as a witness on the divorce petition that evening. The papers were filed at the county courthouse on Tuesday. On Friday, while Gerald was having lunch in town, a process server handed him the envelope. He returned to the farmhouse furious, attempting every approach: anger over public embarrassment, charm, promises to resolve things privately, and extended silences. I sat quietly at the table, mending an old work coat, and laid the printed photographic evidence between us sheet by sheet. Gerald looked through the pages, completely out of words for the first time in 5 years. I picked up my sewing, walked upstairs, and left him alone in the kitchen. During the summer, Gerald remained living in the den downstairs, as permitted by state law while a divorce is pending. He launched a subtle public relations effort throughout the community, appearing quiet and deeply saddened at the local co-op, church services, and diners, letting neighbors assume I was inexplicably ending our marriage. Friends from nearby farms approached me with well-meaning concern, encouraging me to reconsider. I kept my answers brief and professional, refusing to air our private business publicly. In late July, Gerald's attorney signaled an intent to challenge the prenuptial agreement, claiming it had been signed under duress shortly before the wedding. Harriet advised me that while the claim was legally weak, pursuing it through the court system could delay finalization by 8 to 12 months. A timeframe Gerald's team assumed I had, unaware of my health condition. At the same time, the physical toll of chemotherapy worsened. One night, after a severe reaction, I was on the bathroom floor when my phone rang. It was Maren, explaining that a hospital scheduling nurse had reached out to her as my designated emergency contact. I kept my explanation brief, attributing the contact to routine updates following my estate planning changes earlier that spring. Maren accepted the explanation, though her tone remained watchful. By August, the Whitfield packing deal collapsed entirely. Recognizing the legal disputes surrounding the property, Whitfield's board selected an alternative facility in an adjacent county. Dana Whitfield ended contact with Gerald, and his demeanor shifted from performance to genuine frustration. Later that month, a severe bile duct blockage caused a sudden spike in fever, requiring a 3-day hospital admission for a minor procedure. Because the hospital contacted my designated emergency contact, Maren arrived at the facility and saw the medical charts, oncology identification, and treatment setups firsthand. Standing at the bedside, she asked directly how long I had been dealing with the illness. I told her the complete truth. The diagnosis had come in March, the condition was terminal, and I was focusing my remaining energy on securing the farm and family estate. Maren called Caleb to the hospital, and together we discussed the reality of the situation. Both kids urged me to disclose my health status to the court, noting that judges often expedite legal proceedings for terminally ill petitioners. I declined. Disclosing the diagnosis publicly during the divorce would allow Gerald to claim the role of a devoted, grieving husband before the community. I preferred to conclude the legal matter strictly on its merits. At the final settlement conference, Gerald's attorney attempted to stall for extended discovery terms. I requested 5 minutes to speak directly to Gerald across the table. I offered a revised settlement. I would increase his lump sum payment from $60,000 to $95,000, allow him to keep his vehicle, and cover his initial legal fees, Provided all final divorce papers were executed immediately, he vacated the farmhouse within 30 days, and he formally waived every claim against the trust, estate, and insurance policies. Faced with immediate expenses and no alternate funding, Gerald accepted the terms on the spot. His single addition was a request to attend the upcoming Harvest Festival as a family member to maintain public appearances. I declined firmly. However, I agreed that I would not issue public statements or explanations regarding the divorce to the local press or community groups. The final judgment was officially entered in late September. Foster versus Mercer was concluded, the prenuptial agreement was upheld, and the Orchard Trust remained completely intact. 2 weeks before the festival, Dr. Okafor reviewed my updated imaging scans. The disease was progressing rapidly, and further chemotherapy would yield little benefit. I made the decision to conclude active treatments and transition to home hospice care immediately following the Harvest Festival. With my remaining strength, I spent the evenings in the cider house preparing for the future. I wrote individual annual birthday letters for Maren and Caleb covering every year until their 30th birthdays, along with notes for future milestones, weddings, first homes, and major career moments. Caleb set up a digital camera in the orchard rows, and together we recorded instructional videos on farm operations, how to test fruit maturity, maintain the cider press machinery, monitor storage temperatures, and manage seasonal pruning. On the eve of the festival, I used a stepladder to reach the central wooden beam in the cider house, tracing over the carved pencil lettering one last time to ensure it remained clear. The second Saturday of October arrived with clear skies and mild weather. The entire town attended. Neighbors, local business owners, co-op workers, and longtime patrons. Both cider presses ran continuously, hay wagons toured the rows, and Caleb managed parking and grounds operations seamlessly. At late afternoon, as the sunlight turned golden through the trees, I gathered Maren and Caleb near the cider house entrance. I retrieved the main brass key ring, holding the keys to the farmhouse, barn, storage sheds, and equipment, which had been carried by the Foster family for generations. I placed the keys into Maren's hands and folded her fingers over them. "Your grandfather carried these," I told her quietly. "Then your father, then me. Now they belong to you and Caleb." As dusk approached, a vehicle pulled up near the outer gate. Gerald stepped out alone, looking tired and uncharacteristically hesitant. He walked to the edge of the fence line and called out, asking for a moment to speak privately and clear the air. In my coat pocket, I held the formal hospice admission paperwork scheduled for the following Monday. Disclosing my terminal condition right then would have instantly exposed his behavior to everyone present and provided immediate public vindication. Instead, I looked at him calmly across the wooden gate. The legal matters were settled, the estate was protected, and my children's future was secure. "Go home, Gerald," I said simply. "That's all." He waited for a moment, realizing there was nothing left to negotiate, then returned to his vehicle and drove away. I walked back to the cider house, where Maren handed me a cup of fresh cider from the evening run. Hospice care began that Monday. We set up a medical bed in the first-floor living room, near the large south-facing window, overlooking the main rows of the orchard. Throughout November, my children managed my care with incredible devotion. Maren maintained the daily medication schedule in a spiral notebook, using the same neat ledger system I had used for farm accounting. Caleb brought a fresh apple from the storage house to my windowsill every afternoon, and spent time each evening carefully applying lotion to my hands to ease the nerve discomfort. I completed the final written notes from bed, including a sealed envelope marked, "To be opened on the first harvest I miss." On the 3rd of December, just before sunrise, I passed away peacefully with Maren and Caleb at my side, listening to the winter wind moving through the orchard rows. The funeral service filled the local church to capacity. Gerald attended, arriving late and taking a seat in the back row. During the service, Pastor Jim read a statement I had prepared, sharing the timeline of my diagnosis the previous March, my quiet fight through the spring and summer, and my focus on securing the farm's future for my children. As the timeline became clear, the congregation realized that while Gerald was complaining about estate disputes and negotiating financial settlements during the summer, he had been pressing a terminally ill woman who was quietly protecting her family. the community silently shifted its perspective, and Gerald left the reception early without fanfare. Over the following year, the farm continued to operate smoothly under Marin and Caleb's management. The Educational Trust funded Marin's final agriculture business courses, while Caleb maintained every piece of farm machinery with expert care. When the next October arrived, the Harvest Festival opened under clear, bright skies. Both cider presses ran at full capacity, and the community returned in full support. At dusk, Marin and Caleb gathered beneath the large northern spy apple tree near the cider house. Holding a lantern, Caleb stood by as Marin opened the final sealed envelope and read my letter aloud to the family and friends assembled. My loves, if you are reading this, then the orchard has done what orchards are meant to do. It has outlived the farmer, which is the entire point of planting. Do not spend pressing day being sad beneath these trees. Sample this year's run, debate the flavor balance, look after one another, and remember, you always return the harvest to those who cared for the tree. You cared for me completely. I had the best rows. A true legacy is not merely the property or wealth you leave behind. It is what you build, protect, and place with your own hands into the care of the people you love.